been an extraordinary week. Really lovely. Loving people is fun no matter what, but when people fully engage and trust and feel it, you don't love them more, but man, is it funner. And this past week's just been a hoot. Just a great number of people choosing to trust. Some of them who hadn't trusted for a long time, some people, new people. Just kind of makes it way more interesting. Certainly more fulfilling. A couple of weeks ago I saw a young lady, and well, I say young, and my definition of young is getting older every year, who had become increasingly socially incapacitated to the point where, you know, her world had just shrunk down to a single room where she pretty much lived all day long, not going out for much of anything at all. That pattern tends to worsen to the point where people become emotionally disabled, then physically ill, and they die. No kidding. They die of loneliness, like no joke. There have been studies that show that kids in orphanages die of not being touched. Turns out so do adults. It takes adults a little longer, but they're just as dead. And I came into the room and I sat down with her a couple weeks ago, and I told her what I'd be doing and suggested that she only needed to do one thing to make her experience here a success. Just trust me. And I'm not sure I've ever seen, maybe a couple times, anybody just flip a switch in their head. She just decided within the first 30 seconds, okay, all right, then I'll completely trust you, despite the fact that she'd never really trusted anybody in her life, accepting, of course, the fact that every baby initially trusts and then we beat it out of them. But she just made a decision to trust, which made it freakishly fun for the next several days. Just trusting is scary. It's like jumping off a cliff. You could drop to your death, or you can sprout wings and fly. And dang if she didn't. Been housebound for years, hadn't had a job, miserable, alone, no friends. And, you know, after about a week of talking to her on the phone, I said, well, so let's look for a job. And I think I talked about this last week. She was pretty nervous about this, and was afraid that I was suggesting she get a job so she'd be worthwhile. No. Going out and looking for a job is just an opportunity to practice being yourself while you're not afraid. So she did. So she goes out on her goes to a temp agency. On her very first interview, she gets a job. She still has it a week later. In her own words, she said, I would have crashed and burned in the past long before the completion of a week. She's developing friendships there. She radiates joy. Radiates joy. She feels loved. She feels peaceful. She feels content. She just sucks love in. It's a miraculous thing to see. It's kind of a privilege, really, to get to see, because that kind of trust is pretty rare. I'm not sure I could have done that. Pretty sure, actually, I couldn't have. But she has a gift for it. We all have different gifts. Some of us are smart, some of us are insightful, some creative, some musical. Some people have a native gift to trust, and who knew? She does. Nobody ever had a chance to see it because she'd spent her whole life around people who hurt her. So she'd never had a chance to let that gift flower. It's pretty spectacular to see. Lady named Elaine, change of story, different person, has been learning about real love for a couple of years. She's attended seminars and retreats, participated in conference calls, groups, real love calls on a great number of occasions, and yet After all of that, she was still afraid. She called me. She said, I don't get it. She said, I still get afraid after all this time, going to all these meetings, doing all this stuff, and I can certainly see in the eyes of other people that they don't feel comfortable around me. Surely they sure don't feel loved by me, but even being around me makes them uncomfortable. So I must be really afraid. And I said, it's unintentional on your part, but you are so busy defending yourself. It's just, we've talked about this before in regards to PCST. It's just a reflex, like a knee jerk. Somebody speaks to you, boo, and you immediately react by defending yourself. And then you're screwed. Because as soon as you react to defend yourself, you put yourself in that hyper-vigilant state of PTSD. And now, no matter what anybody does, they confirm your analysis that they're going to hurt you. No matter what they do. They reach out to shake your hand, you take it as a threat. So then you react more, then you're more hypervigilant, you see even more cause for alarm, and it spirals into the toilet in, about 3.5 seconds. You're so busy defending yourself that you can't feel what I'm doing. So no matter what words I say, or what I do, or what words you say, at the end of the conversation, you're not happier. She said, I still don't get it. Now, why didn't she get it? Because she's still defending herself. The words I said weren't complicated. And I get this a lot from people. They say, well, I don't understand. No, they really don't. And it's either because they're afraid, so they can't understand anything, or they don't want to understand. They're hearing something they don't want to hear. So they just say, they go, I don't get it, I'm confused. They don't realize they're lying or making excuses, but they still are. So she said, I still don't get it. I said, no, you really don't. You're too afraid either to feel my love for you or to understand what I'm saying. You're too busy defending yourself. It's kind of like this picture. Picture you're asking me for a bowl of ice cream. In this case, love. So I go to the freezer, I get you what you want, I hand you a bowl of ice cream. But then you don't eat it. You're not the slightest bit happy about it. Instead, you stir the bowl and poke at it with a spoon, carefully examining the contents for hidden razor blades. You persist in doing this to the point that the ice cream then eventually, of course, melts into a puddle. Then you pour it on the floor, still looking for razor blades. So you never get the effect of the ice cream. Too busy defending. You never know what's going to get through to people. But crazily, this story got through. And she started listening. And it's still a natural reflex for her to defend herself. You can't just stop a lifelong reflex that's been built as a result of thousands of experiences. But you can decide what to do with it, the reflex. So now she goes to defend herself, and I go, you're defending yourself. And if she keeps defending, I go, stop talking. Stop talking. I'm not attacking you. You're defending yourself as a reflex, but there's no reason to. And then she recovers her sanity. We've developed this little system of communicating that to her. And now she can change her reaction. She often can't stop it from happening, but she can stop it from persisting. And that's true with our natural reactions, with random crazy thoughts, with lust, with all kinds of things. Reflexive thoughts they're just going to happen. But we can choose to nurture them or starve them to death, banish them. Now, there's no intention here to compare the first woman I talked about who has a gift to trust and Elaine, who found trusting just very nearly impossible. It's not comparing them. One is not better than the other. We're just different. So you don't need to feel bad that you're not gifted with trust. You don't need to feel wonderful about yourself, because you might be. We all have different gifts. Work with the ones you have. And the ones you don't have, often you just kind of leave them alone. Although trusting isn't one you can leave alone. That's one that we all have to develop, whether we natively have it or not. Focus on what you need to learn. Don't compare yourself to other people. That's just, it's just death, because they ain't you. Here's somebody who wrote, much of my fighting comes not from being afraid, this was very insightful, not from being afraid to be wrong, because I talk about that a lot. Well, we're just afraid to be wrong. She says, it's not so much that. I believe now it comes from knowing I'm wrong and being afraid to admit it. Now, that's a subtle distinction, but a worthwhile one. She says, my fighting is an avoidance technique. I can't deny that I've had thoughts that, like, for example, being a group host looks a certain way. And if I'm too truthful about my feelings, people won't trust me at all. So I know that I'm wrong in some of the things that I do in group, but I just can't admit it. So I've got to learn to change that pattern and be more open with people, even when I'm at home with my husband, even when I'm the host of a group, and experience what it's like for people to just see who I really am. It's kind of a cool insight that she had. Somebody wrote and said, I know you've given us many ways to get over fear, grief, and so on, like the five truths, get loved, be held, make phone calls to wise people, attend groups, trust the love I already have. I'm not saying that these things don't work, but I was wondering if you have any other suggestions for dealing with fear, grief, and so on. That would be kind of like, I just spent an hour on the phone with Verizon and completely hard rebooting my computer, and what a bother. And they kept telling me what to do. Do this, turn off this, do off this. I could just imagine what they'd said if the guide said, okay, now press this button next, and if I'd said, well, isn't there another way? Yeah, there's lots of other ways, but they don't work. Or somebody saying, I want to operate my computer, but isn't there another way other than plugging it into the wall socket? So the answer to your question is, are there any other suggestions? No, not really. The whole reason for those is that they work. If I remember that there are people who genuinely care about me, if I remember that God loves me, if I remember that everything's going to be okay, if I get in the flow of the universe, if I get loved and held and make phone calls to people who remind me that I'm loved, who give me an infusion of unconditional love, if I trust the love that I already have, I will be happy. So if anybody manages to do all of those things, all of those suggestions to be happy, and really do them, and you're not happier, let me know. I just got a call half an hour ago from a guy who said, I have an overwhelming urge to use porn right now. And I said, tell me why. Well, you know, sex. I said, no, it's not about sex. How do you feel? Well, I feel stressed that, stress is why people use porn. Stressed about what? And he named me 3 or 4 things that he was stressed about. And all I did was use the things that we just talked about. Remembering that he's loved, remembering that he's not alone. In one case, not worrying about something he has absolutely no control over. I wasn't trying to make him feel better. I was dealing with the reality of what makes sense to be afraid of and what doesn't make sense to be afraid of, and what he can do about those fears. And by the end of the conversation, I said, I'm not looking for an answer. How do you feel? He said, well, I feel really peaceful. Do you feel like using porn? No, I don't. And I didn't address his porn use at all. It's stress. It's getting rid of fear. Here's a lady who says, I got a call from my 12-year-old's assistant vice principal. I hadn't heard of that job yet. It's like the assistant, associate, next in line, third vice principal. I didn't know there were that many layers. He informed me that another boy had ripped my son's glasses off his face, crushed them, and threw them in the hallway, which is, you know, fairly routine middle school kind of crap. Broken beyond repair. And as I listened to this grown man attempt to understand what happened, clearly he doesn't. He says, and your son is just calm. He's non-phased. He's almost nonchalant. So later I asked my son how he felt. And at first, he said he was worried that he would get in trouble, you know, from school, you know, because whenever there's a fight, sometimes the school just, you know, punishes both kids. And then he thought that we would probably understand. In other words, he trusted us. He remembered that we love him. And then broken glasses just became information to him. He had no need to react because he felt sufficiently loved. This is from a 12-year-old. So the person who asked earlier, so do you have anything other than, you know, remembering that I'm loved? And no, because that's what works. So this 12-year-old remembered that he was loved, and suddenly it didn't matter that some kid had snatched his glasses off and stumped him on the floor. What a remarkable testament to, now I'm talking to the mom who wrote this, to your loving him. That is a kid who feels loved. That's proof that a kid feels loved, that they don't get excited about being attacked. When we feel loved, nothing else matters. Really. I mean, I've heard a phrase like that. With, you know, real love, nothing else matters. So remember this, Mom, when you wonder whether you're doing a good job, because I've talked to you on occasions when you've bemoaned your crappy parenthood. Well, obviously not too crappy, because I'm looking at the result. Your kid. I talked to a guy half an hour ago, just before I got on here. And he was talking about how, well, you know, he's not making progress as much as he'd hope. He's this sweet kid. To me, he's a kid. He's 35. Been an alcoholic since he was 13, I think. Been, hospitalized, been in prison. What a life. Divorces, child custody battles. It's just been awful. And finally, he decided to listen and to trust. I talked to this kid every single day on the phone, have for months. And he was bemoaning that, you know, well, he wasn't further ahead than he should be, you know, as he should be. And there were other people who were doing better than him. And I said, whoa, hey, stop. Compare yourself to 2 years ago. You're not drinking. You're loving your son. You're building a career. You're having to start a fair ways back in that because you spent a whole lot of years, you know, in and out of prisons and hospitals. But you're doing all the right things. And your son feels loved by you. Now hang on for this last one. And your voice is happy. So you're doing the right thing. That's how you tell. By seeing this kind of results. Not the kind of tangible results that you get from money or a promotion. Happiness is the result. This guy was happy, so I know he's doing well. This kid remained happy, even though somebody bullied him at school. So, Mom, think about how many loving steps it took you to get here. And think about how many times on the phone you've called me and gone, oh, I'm just doing a terrible job. What you were doing is comparing where you were with where you were going to be in 5 years, which is stupid. No, you were doing great then. You're just doing better now because you took all those itty-bitty little steps all the time that you were frothing and upset that you weren't doing better. You kept taking them, just like this kid that I was telling you about, who's the 35-year-old who's been an alcoholic for almost his whole life. He took one itty bitty little step at a time, one sober day, one phone call, one visit with me. I visit with him every single week in person. Talk to him on the phone every single day, religiously. And he does it because, well, he's happier. And he's happier because he does it. They feed each other. And just, this is sort of a by the way, you didn't ask me, but you can still be loving and still require that the parents of the kid who snatched the glasses off your kid's head pay for the glasses. So what you do about that's up to you. I'm just saying, being loving doesn't mean always just rolling over and going, oh well, no big deal, you know, smashed my glasses, wrecked my car, whatever. But this is such a cool story. This is a mother who has told me how many times that she's doing a crap job. No, she's not. And this story is proof. Here's somebody who says, if your partner is working, is it wrong to expect a call or a text during the day while they're at work? Well, it's pretty much never works to expect your partner to love you in a particular way. Now, you can express appreciation for your partner calling you. You can ask your partner on a given day, would you be willing to call me at work today? I need a little bit of encouragement. But if you start nagging your partner and saying things like, and I get these calls all the time. I had one last night with a couple. She was annoyed with her partner because he doesn't, exactly these words, spend more time with me. How's he ever to assess what more means? How's he ever going to know that he's successful? I said, well, do you ever tell him exactly, specifically, what you'd like him to do? Like, would you be willing to quit watching TV and come over and snuggle with me? Or come over and snuggle with me and keep watching TV? Well, no, I didn't want to nag him. So how many times have you talked to him about spending more time with you in the last 6 months? 3. She knew the answer. Well, 3 times in 6 months. Honey, there's no way in this world he's going to figure that out. That'd be like if you've ever trained a dog to go walking with you in the neighborhood. You train them by pulling on the collar. It's not mean. It's just how they train the dog to stay with you. If you pull on the chain to keep the dog closer to you 3 times in 6 months, the dog's going to learn absolutely nothing, except that every once in a while you go crazy and pull on the chain. If you want something, you have to ask for it. And what always works is for you to think of your partner. So if your partner's just not one of those people who just is naturally disposed to call you during the day, then call your partner. If your partner's busy, then text your partner. Say sweet little kind, endearing things to your partner that he couldn't possibly let anybody read, you know, in the office. You be the loving one. You do the emailing. If your partner reciprocates, great. But if not, you'll still be happier because you're loving. Often as our partners feel loved, they do reciprocate, but it's not a trading. If you call your partner so he'll call you, you're going to lose because he's going to sense the trading. Here's somebody who says, feeling alone hits me like a wall after a busy day at work. Why does this affect me like this? I know the answer is to connect with other people, but I'd like to know, why do I feel like this after work? I can't answer that question specifically for you because I don't have all of your history, but I can tell you the general pattern. At work, we tend to focus on doing things. So connecting with other people is not our usual pattern at work. We're so distracted by doing at work that we don't notice that we're lonely. Kind of like if you're under fire in Afghanistan, sniper is shooting at you, you tend not to notice you're, say, hungry. When we're at work, we're so distracted by being busy that we don't focus on our loneliness. It's another reason that we play video games, work long hours, watch porn, whatever. They're temporary distractions for the pain of being lonely. And then when we stop, like when you get home after a busy day and the distractions are just poof, gone, then you notice that you're left with just you and you don't like it, and that feels lonely. Hence the need to have people that we can reach out to, or sometimes just remember their love if we can't reach somebody. Pretty important, or the loneliness becomes a habit and you end up alone and secluded in your house or a single room, like this lady that I was talking about at the top of the video chat. Loneliness becomes often an unbreakable habit. Then we can't even let people in. This writer says, this morning I shared the concept of trading imitation love with my friend Flynn. It came up completely naturally, since he was talking about his ex and he was angrily saying, I loved her, but she wasn't loving me back. And I said, nah, you probably weren't loving her. You were doing loving acts and just expecting loving acts in return. And he said, not understanding what I was saying, he said, well, yeah, of course. Just like, well, duh, that's how the world runs. And then I told him the definition of real love and said, so what you were doing wasn't love. This takes some guts. This is very cool. But if you don't say it in an accusing way, people will listen to you. People are actually dying to learn how to be happy. So I admire this person. Back to what he wrote. And so I said, so what you were doing wasn't love. It's called trading. Trading is where I do things for you and I expect you to do things for me. He was completely quiet for a long while. And then he said, holy expletive. Don is teaching me not to say these words. He said, everybody is trading. He said, I can't think of anybody who doesn't trade. The writer continues, it was really cute. It blew his mind to hear that there could be something other than trading. And so he said to me, is there like a book about this? This is how you teach people real love. Really. Everyday conversations. If you look for them, you will see an opportunity to teach somebody something, some principle about unconditional love every single day. If you're not looking, you'll never see them. So example, somebody says, my child is blah, 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 you know, whatever, lazy, disrespectful, rude, difficult, blah, blah, blah. So you can either sympathize, in which case nobody learns a dang thing, and then this parent goes home and emotionally berates the child as usual, or you can say, I've learned that people behave badly when they're in pain. And pretty much emotional pain is always due to not feeling loved, because that's what we want most. And then if the person doesn't want to hear that, they'll either go back to complaining or they'll change the subject. Well, what have you lost? Nothing. But what if they're interested? You just introduced a life-saving principle to somebody who would otherwise possibly never hear it. Just days ago, I went in for a minor surgical procedure, and I was in an operating room. And I'm okay, and you don't have to send me emails. Although still mentally ill, but I'm okay physically. And I was in the operating room, and we were talking about anesthesia people. The anesthetist was there, and the nurse. And the anesthetist said, I don't know how this came up. Oh, I remember. We were talking about the drug that they were going to put me to sleep with, which is a really powerful and effective drug to put people to sleep briefly. And the anesthetist said, I just don't understand. She said, I lost a friend who is an anesthetist to addiction, who used this very drug that she was about to give me because they became addicted to it. A single use is not especially dangerous. She said, I mean, how could your life be so bad, she says in complete innocence, that you'd want to kill yourself? She was, in fact, virtually sneering at the idea that somebody could be so stupid as to think that their life was so bad they'd want to be dead. And just as calm as could be, I said, well, I was an addict and I wanted to kill myself. You could have heard a flea pass gas, because she was making fun of this person. And I'm going, well, I completely understand. And just on a hunch, just taking a look at her and the way she talked, I said, you probably wouldn't want to take this risk with somebody unless you're practiced at doing it. But after I said I was an addict, I looked at her and I said, how many times have you been married? And she got this look of surprised horror on her face and said, 5. I said, how miserable would you have to be married 5 times? She started to get the joke. I said, honey, everybody's unhappy in some way. Some people take drugs, other people kill themselves, other people get married multiple times. Some people never get married, but just, monogamously go from, well, sometimes not monogamously, from one partner to another to another. And because the surgeon was late, he was doing whatever they do when they're late. We sat there and talked for half an hour in the operating room with me, half naked in these ridiculous little gowns that you'd be arrested for if you were out on the street. And we talked about her life and her children and about how she could better love her children. We're in the operating room, and there was an opportunity out of the blue to teach somebody about real love. And it's not because I wrote the books about it. Anybody could have done that. I'm going to skip that one and that one. I'll probably be sorry in about 30 minutes. Zoe's story. So in this, I forget to write this down sometimes. I'm pretty sure that in this story, Zoe's 14 months old. And so her mother says, my mom and dad have utterly blown me away at how loving they are to Zoe. Because I certainly didn't see that as a child. And if her parents are watching, just get over this. And Zoe is so sensitive to their genuine feelings of affection for her. She's only seen my parents like a couple of times this year, because it turns out that Zoe and her mom live like completely on opposite sides of the country, like completely, like Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. And yet every time we Skype with my mom, which is, fairly regularly, Zoe just squeals with excitement. As soon as she sees my mom's picture on Skype, she starts giggling uncontrollably and saying, hi, hi, which is, one of her only coherent words at 14 months. On the other hand, it took her quite a while to get used to my mother-in-law, even though we live in the same city as her. Now, what's the point of this? That one set of parents is better than the other? No. The point is, kids are exquisitely sensitive to how we feel. It doesn't matter really even so much what we do for them. It's how we treat them, how we look at them. Earlier today, we could do a whole video chat pretty much any day just on the things that happened that day. But earlier today, a man wrote me and he said, I'm having all these difficulties with my son, blah, 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 blah. And of course he was telling me how he did all the right things, and his son was bratish and rude and would just suddenly break out into a rage. And I knew the man well enough to say, you're angry all the time. You're still angry at your family of origin. You don't feel at peace with yourself. You're afraid. You're empty. You feel like the world has treated you unjustly. And even though you don't yell at your son or hit him, what he feels from you is your pain. And when you're in pain, you become immediately emotionally unavailable for your son. Your son, all he registers is no love from dad. And kids can do this from, well, Zoe's 14 months old. Kids can do this from a very early age. So the father's like, come on. How do you know that? So just for kicks, I called the kid. And I said, I'm not going to tell you the whole conversation, but I said, can you sense this, this, and this from your dad? The way his dad was. No yelling, no hitting, no bad language, just can you sense the tension, the emptiness? And the kid went, whoa, that's exactly what I feel. He couldn't have even put words to it. And that's the problem. We're damaging our children. Our children can't tell us what we're doing. When you get into a car wreck, it's, kind of obvious. Two great big metal objects hit each other. There are, smashed windows and crushed fenders. It's pretty obvious, cause and effect. With our children, it's not so obvious. All we have to do is be unavailable because we're in pain. And it was killing this kid. So, remarkable. This 14-month-old's already figuring this out. And if this 14-month-old is around people who are not loving, she shies away from them. And if it happens from her parents, which fortunately it's not, it's crushing. And we destroy them. Here's somebody who says, I asked my husband, George, sometimes I can't remember whether I've actually changed the names or that's their name, so I shudder each time I read one. I asked him what he would like from me as a loving gift. He said, don't say anything while I'm driving, which is a really polite way of saying shut up while I'm driving. She continues, as you know, I have PTSD from a car accident, but that doesn't excuse a lot of what I've done while he was driving. I have been unloving, controlling, criticizing, and I would say unnecessary things about his driving. I do the unloving part less, but with the PTSD, sometimes something will just trigger me and the fear will come up for me still, like an automatic reflex, like I don't have a choice. I agree with you. That's what PTSD does, which is really true of most of our lives, our entire lives. We all have PTSD from something. Usually our whole childhood. You continue, but I made the choice to change my reaction. I still sometimes have the reflex, but at least I've stopped yelling, George, which never calms people down when they're driving, when I get frightened. So he's taking it less personally. When he's driving, I also choose to put my attention on something else, like reading or road signs or whatever, and that helps. See, this is very cool what you're doing. You're making a conscious choice. The fear is still there. I'm sure that when something happens, like he slams on the brakes or barely makes it through or doesn't through a red light, that old reaction stiffens you up, but then you choose what you're going to do next. That's brilliant. Now, it may not work entirely, but at least you're working at making a choice instead of just having an involuntary reaction and excusing yourself because, well, you can't help it. How many times have I heard people tell me that? Well, I just couldn't help it. And see, as long as we have that attitude toward, well, I just can't help it, well, then we never will be able to help it. All right, well, then I agree. Maybe on this occasion you couldn't help it. But if you work at being able to help it, you'll be able to modify that initial involuntary reaction by a lot. And you don't have to do it perfectly. And tell him that. Just do your best to make choices. Just be aware and tell him that you're working at it. Now you're doing a thing together. Instead of him just, in the past, you would have just seen him as violating you, hurting you again, and you would have involuntarily reacted, then he would have felt like he'd been violated, and we all know that that just goes straight into the toilet in less than 10 seconds. You continue. The other day, George ran through a red light. I was actually calm, and I said, that's a red light. Very cool, by the way. I think I said it twice, and he went through it anyway. So if you could say it's a red light twice and he still made it through it, must have been pretty red. But it was all okay. We said nothing more about it. I told him what I needed to say to him, but I didn't get all freaky and yell. Baby, that's just really commendable. You've consistently worked at making a different choice. You changed your life by deciding it was going to be different. You were consciously aware of what was happening, a lifetime pattern of PTSD, and you chose to change your perception and your reaction, and that is bloody impressive. You said driving a little further down, he didn't see somebody, this is apparently on the same day, he didn't see somebody in a crosswalk. And I calmly said, somebody is in the crosswalk, or something like that. And then I put my hand on his chest and asked him how he was. Was everything okay? And he said, it's fine. And I said, just seems like your mind is not on driving. Is there anything I could do? How cool is that? I'm assuming that you were putting your hand on his chest and calming him down after he didn't run over the person in the crosswalk. Very calm of you. So you continue. I'm amazed to learn that now that I'm in less fear, I see the effects everywhere. I used to be panicked flying. Now, much less. I can do public speaking more relaxed, whereas it was terrifying me before. I have less fear walking into any situation I encounter. But I never thought that my visceral things to things like being in a car, that instant panic, could ever change. Because riding in a car had once had such a huge impact on my life. Yet, there I was, remaining calm. Who would have thunk? Fear, I've said it before, is cumulative. When we've been trained from childhood to be afraid, we're often at the edge of fear all the time, constantly sunburned. And then it takes nothing to push us over into uncontrollable fear, and then we protect ourselves. That's what PTSD is. Fear is banished by love. Better than anything else banishes fear. As your fear decreases overall from being loved, it turns out that your fear of every individual thing tends to become less. People write me regularly saying they've lost their fear of flying, heights, rats, spiders, whatever. Phobias go away without ever specifically addressing them because fear accumulates. We just need to get rid of the baseline fear. Sylvie's story. Her mother says, Bonnie, who was at the time 4 months old, and Sylvie and I were hanging out together, and Sylvie would not stop kissing and touching Bonnie's face, and it was bugging her. So I repeatedly asked her to back up, suggesting alternate ways that she could be affectionate. And finally, I just said, get out of her face. Sylvie stopped. Sylvie was 3 at the time, and said, it sounds, Mother, like you're mad at me. I can't read this without laughing. I just, in my experience as a child and as a parent, I can't imagine a child being told, get out of her face, and not reacting badly. And instead, suggesting that maybe Mom was having a bad day. That takes a lot of calm. And even though Mom, in this particular case, was being impatient, maybe even irritated, Sylvie had been loved consistently enough that Sylvie just took it as a aberration, as a freak accident, and chose to remain calm and point out to her mother what she was doing. What a life. Here's somebody who says, I was on my own for 3 years, but now I've been going out with a man for 5 months. We both read your dating book. We're in our mid-30s. Unusually smart of you to start off by reading the dating book. Basically, this man is perfect. I would like to meet him. He's very loving, caring, understanding, considerate, and generous with his time. The thing is that I think that maybe we're more suited as friends than partners. I guess my main problem is that I just really don't feel particularly excited to be with him, which seems unfair to both of us And it's strange, since we get along really well and we're interested in the same things, maybe we're just too similar. And it's like going out with a clone of myself. I know you say that people get together because of initial chemistry, but what if I never have that? Is this something that can develop later? It seems a shame if I'll never have that with him. I feel like I'm being selfish to say that I don't want to go out with you because I don't feel excited often enough. Initial chemistry very often is part of a relationship. I mean, we're just kind of almost involuntarily attracted to people because they look a certain way. They carry themselves a certain way. And there's really nothing wrong with that being a starting place. But then it matters what happens next. It matters that we build a foundation of unconditional caring. And if we do that, you can develop the excitement later. The unconditionally loving portion of the relationship is infinitely more than the excitement, which, if it isn't based on unconditional, if you add excitement to unconditional love, that's just fun. Like you add sex to unconditional love and a committed relationship, well then it's just fun. Whereas the other way around, somebody once said, well, it sounds like you're imposing a moral judgment. I've been in audiences of 1,000 singles and asked, how many of you have had sex before you got married? Everybody, pretty much. And how many times did the initial excitement of sex persist long enough that that became a foundation of a lasting relationship? By lasting, I mean more than, 2 months. Not one hand. So let's keep reading. You say, potentially, part of the problem for me is that he has a lot of bad debt, although he's positive about it and working hard to sort it out. I believe he'll succeed. For a while, he's been living in his van, and I'm not really sure that I want to live in the van with him. I'm also effectively homeless and living with my parents. I want to settle down and have kids. Sorry. I hate to give away the punchline before I say it, but I don't think he's at the same stage as me at the moment. And yes, we're sleeping together. I wouldn't say it's great, but I don't think that we're using it as a form of imitation love. Well, by now, if I wasn't trying to be polite on a video chat, I would be rolling on the floor laughing. So you're fairly early in a relationship. You're in your mid-30s. Neither of you has ever had a lasting relationship before, but you're having sex together for what reason? You've never had a lasting relationship. You don't know what unconditional love is. So are you suggesting that if it's not imitation, you're having sex as an expression of your undying and experienced unconditional love? No. The odds of that are so small as to defy description. Of course you're using it as imitation love. But you've had sex with other people who were simply more sexually exciting. Or sex was simply newer to you then. And so because it's not as exciting with this guy, you're thinking, well, I don't know, it's just lacking the excitement. You're just assessing the degree of imitation love you're exchanging with this guy. Now, I'm not condemning you, not at all. I am saying that what I'm hearing from you is pretty significant denial. He's in bad debt, but he says that he's confident he'll work it out, so you're confident that he'll work it out. And yet you have absolutely no indication whatever that he will. He's living in a van. What do you think the odds are that he's going to work this thing out? He's in a van and you live with your parents, but you're considering a partnership. It's hard to imagine. You're having sex, but it's not imitation love. It all just sounds overwhelmingly like an illusion. Now, admittedly, this is how it sounds. Strongly, I might add, but I don't know you individually well enough to tell you to leave the relationship. I'm just giving you feedback to consider. Every word sounds like a delusion. Then you continue. I would be grateful for any advice or questions that I need to ask myself. When people aren't familiar with real love, it's utterly unavoidable that they reach out for the excitement of imitation. You kind of really just can't help it. And you have bought the lie that the whole world does, that excitement is love. Or like the guy said earlier, he said, I don't know anybody who doesn't trade imitation love. Right. And so if this guy hasn't ever met anybody who doesn't, I'll bet you haven't either. And so we call the sufficient trading of imitation love excitement. And you can't imagine a relationship without enough of that kind of trading excitement. You watch guys who are on the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange or in the pit of it's the one in Chicago where they trade pork bellies, and it'll come to me later. They look pretty excited. Plenty of excitement, but they don't look very happy. You're actually preferring the commodities exchange. You're actually preferring imitation love here over real love because you're more familiar with it, because it's more predictable. It's been more exciting for you. You know it better. It's understandable, but the likelihood that you'll find somebody who will give you both excitement of imitation love and real love in the beginning is really low. No kidding. Actually, just the odds that you're going to find somebody who's going to unconditionally love you in the beginning is very low. Much better to start with somebody who's at least willing to learn the real thing. Develop that with him. And then you can add the excitement. Really, it comes. It's very exciting to be with somebody who loves you unconditionally. And then eventually, sometimes you discover the excitement isn't even as important as you used to think it was. There's plenty just in feeling loved. Now, there's more. You described him as perfect, and yet he has lots of bad debt. He's living in a van. It sounds very likely, to the point of virtual certainty, that he's just not a responsible person. And that's part of being happy. Loved, loving, and responsible, being the triad. It's easy to just be accepting and kind while you don't have a job, you live in a van, you do nothing, you have no responsibilities in the world, not a whole lot of contention inherent in that kind of lifestyle. I've known many people who live like that. Homeless people who live in alleys. They're fairly accepting of the world. Why not? They don't expect anything of the world. Nobody bothers you. You don't bother anybody else. And if you do nothing, you tend to attract less conflict. And that sounds like this guy. Sounds like you. More. You're close to homeless yourself and being bailed out by your parents. So it sounds like neither one of you knows what responsibility and genuine happiness is. Again, not a criticism, just a distillation of a great number of observations and experience. In that case, how would you know real love or happiness or perfection if you ran into it? You wouldn't. It's just something for you to think about. What is much more likely here is that you found a man that you simply don't have conflict with. And I've known many such people. They don't work hard, they're not responsible, they're kind of like whatever about everything. In Hawaii, they actually have a gesture for that. You know, just sort of like, yeah, whatever. He doesn't criticize you, which you confuse with being genuinely accepting. Probably in great part because he has very low standards for himself and everybody else. You're both just kind of okay. So you're like not in conflict, but you don't really know what love is. So what I'm saying is, I'm just suggesting that you consider learning what genuine happiness is. Find real love from somebody who can really give it to you unconditionally, who's not a potential exclusive partner. Learn what it's like to accept love from more apparent, and then decide if you can recognize unconditional love from somebody who might be a potential partner. You'll know more what it feels like. Much higher rate of success if you approach it that way, as opposed to starting off with a guy who's living in a van and is in bad debt and just doesn't fight with you. Yeah, I think we can do this in a few minutes. Here's somebody who says, you talk a lot about our mistakes and the fact that we don't have to feel guilty. I just want to make it clear for myself. I'm a math teacher, and in class I taught some things that were wrong, several things, to the students. A student pointed it out and I said, yep, you're right, and I corrected my mistake. But then the students become skeptical of my knowledge. They might think that if I made mistakes a few times, then I might make it many times when they don't point it out to me. And then they won't trust me. Now, mind you, she's saying that these aren't things that happen. These are all things that she's worried is going to happen. Then they won't trust me, and it's possible that they'll complain to the head of the department that I'm not a good teacher, and it may harm my job, and I may lose it. Do you see where the fear goes? She's gone from making a mistake on the blackboard to being fired. The whole time, she says, though, the whole time I feel not so bad because I know that my mistake doesn't define me. So she, in her mind, the fear built and built, and she was going to go from a mistake on the blackboard to being fired, but then she makes a conscious choice to stop that pattern, just like the lady with PTSD in the car. She says, who I am is not my mistakes. So I chose to feel peaceful. But then, what if I do hear that I'm getting a warning or I'll be losing my job? How can I solve this in my mind? So she's kind of in an in-between world. She goes to fear. She realizes the fear is irrational and that she does have people that love her and she's not just her mistakes. But then, what if I do get fired? All you can do is your best, kid. That's it. There's nothing after your best. Sometimes people will say, well, you really screwed this up. And I go, yeah, I really did. I did the best I could and I couldn't get it all done. And then they start to tell me how they expected more of me. I don't listen to that anymore. I go, back up. I screwed up. Already said that. And I did the best I could. And now you're telling me I should have done more. So after my best, there isn't anything more. Not a thing. Sometimes people will text me and they'll say, do you have any time to talk to me? And I say, well, I've got 3 minutes if you call right now. And I get to the end of 3 minutes and I say, well, my 3 minutes is up. I've got to go. And they say, but. I say, no, got to go isn't followed by but. Got to go is followed by goodbye. Same thing here. You do your best and then you stop. Stop fussing. You watch your work to observe for mistakes. You do your best. You listen to the input of others. It's all you can do. And sometimes your mistakes might result in consequences like students distrusting you or you're losing your job. I know, but there's still nothing you can do but learn from them and move on. What possible good could come from worrying ahead of time that you'll make mistakes or hanging on to guilt for the mistakes that you did make? Doesn't change the mistake, and it only distracts your mind and your heart as you're trying to do the right thing. If we worried enough ahead of time about mistakes, we'd never have relationships, never have children, certainly, never have jobs. And some people do make that choice, and they turn into hermits, like the lady I was talking about at the top of the chat. So remember what we've talked about. Find love. Trust it, remember it, share it. Once you're sure enough that you're loved, you'll have the greatest treasure in the world. It helps immeasurably, even at work, to know that no matter what mistakes you make, if you feel loved, they can't take the gift of love from you. That's what that lady that I told you about at the top of the video chat has done. She's at work and she says, I don't care anymore if I make mistakes because they can't take your love from me. It calms the fears. Remember those simple principles and your whole week will change. And then we'll talk about some more stuff next week. I'll see you then.